Alors, bonjour à tous. Morning everybody. Bonjour, ça va? Je vais inviter les panélistes à venir devant. Dr Hussein, Dr Ahmed et Dr André, s'il vous plaît. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Vous avez la traduction, si vous... moi, je parle en français, eux, ils vont parler en anglais. Donc, vous avez la traduction pour ceux qui en ont besoin. Voilà. Alors, tout d'abord, nous disons merci. Merci d'être là ce matin, de nous avoir fait l'amitié de partager cet instant avec nous. Euh, nous serons entretenus pendant 7 heures par Dr André Kamga, par Dr Hussein et Dr Ahmed de ICPAC. André Kamga, on ne le présente plus, le directeur général de l'ACMAD, Centre africain des applications de la météorologie au développement. Alors, on ne va pas traîner, on va aller droit au but. Je vous invite à partager ces instants autour du thème Multi-Hazard Early Warning and Early Action in Africa, from data rescue to early warning and early action. Sur ce, je voudrais inviter le docteur André à faire sa présentation.
Okay, good morning everyone. So this presentation is in the framework of implementation of the multi-hazard early warning system by the African Union Commission, UNDRR and partners. So in the implementation of this program, we have achieved, let's say, 3 objectives. The first one has been the establishment of the Situation Room at the African Union Commission in Addis Ababa. The second was the establishment of the Continental Multi-Hazard Advisory Center at ACMAT in Niamey, in Niger. And the third was the establishment of the Situation Room for the IGAD region at ICPAC. So these 3 structures are now operational, contributing to early warning in Africa. So this presentation will focus on the Continental Multi-Hazard Advisory Center at ACMAT, and then we'll have presentations from ICPAC, and then probably some discussions on what we do, let's say, next year. So one of the major challenge that we have ahead is to effectively move to impact forecasting for effective early action. Because basically, to define early action, we need a forecast of the impact of expected hazard. So this is just the slide of the center at ACMAT in real time. So in this process of impact forecasting, during the past few years, impact forecasting would require data, particularly historical records, both for climate and for the impacts. For example, number of expected people to be affected, number of deaths, losses and damages in the historical records for similar events. So we have teamed up with the European Union program called Copernicus because back in the 90s, the Belgium Development Corporation funded the scanning of historical records in about 40 countries, particularly meteorological services in Africa. And microfishes from these historical records are available. They have been imaged already. And next year, we are expecting to continue work with the Copernicus program at the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecast to basically digitalize this historical record. It's a tedious work, and the idea is to do it country by country, actually setting up teams in countries involving the Met services, eventually young people from high schools and universities to actually do the key entry work behind this exercise. This will help us to have a historical record, and from this record, we will select those past high impact events and then look with the other organizations, particularly the National Institute of Statistics, on the losses and damages associated with past events. So this will build the database to start effectively this process of impact forecasting for us. Secondly, this effort will help to run again the reanalysis, which is a data set that we use for climate monitoring, and then improve the quality of climate monitoring information for Africa. So this slide was just to highlight something important we need to know related to impact forecasting. Recently, in Bulletin of the American Met Society in 2021, we had a publication actually describing what is it an impact forecasting. So here, it is actually impact projections, actually applied to climate scenarios. So first of all, in an impact forecasting, we need to indicate what is the climate phenomena, or what is the climate hazard that we can expect from the phenomenon that we forecast, and then what are the potential impacts over a given location, and then the consequences and measures that can be proposed, for example, to update an emergency plan and prepare the budget. So until now, it's still a challenge. As you know, we are still in some time having the hazard forecast made, but no action, no preparation action before the event, and we are still continuing to undertake rescue and recovery after disasters. So in an impact forecast, We'll have all these elements involved and work with our partners to actually update emergency plans and budget these updated plans effectively for implementation. So on the aspect of where we are in terms of actually predicting, forecasting extreme events, our recent work under this Continental Climate Advisory Center is showing that for most of the heavy rain events that usually lead to floods, the predictability actually reach 3 to 4 days, in sometimes 5 days. And what is missing now is, in such cases, having briefings with the specific countries expected to be impacted and follow up to the issuance of the warning and then action upon this warning. So in the upcoming year, our focus will be on building the relevant partnerships within the Met community first, between the continental, regional, and national meteorological services, and then between the Met community and the disaster management organizations. So this is a case in West Africa, the coastal part of West Africa. On your left, it is the vigilance product, indicating well several days ahead that area, which later on your left upper right map is actually the observed precipitation, and what you see in red are locations who recorded precipitation above 50 millimeters that we consider as a heavy rain event. So one can see clearly that the forecast several days ahead actually indicate where the event will occur. And for usually we have a challenge and sometimes complaints that if you are doing this at continental level, what is the role of the national or the regional meteorological offices? As you can see clearly here, the outlook 3 to 4 days ahead gives you a large region, and it is only a regional office of OCHA or Red Cross who may use that information. We need at the sub-regional and national level to do this forecast so that we can pinpoint actually the city where the event will occur. And this cannot be done effectively at the continental level. So there is clearly a complementarity effort there that we should activate, train the national Met services to undertake the forecast at least 24 hours ahead at the city scale, do this work at the continental scale to give information several days ahead, and make sure that the disaster management community is well involved in communication, and that our forecast move to impact forecasting. Then this one is just the output of a set of products, reanalysis in particular, which are generated to detect actually climate change. In this case, on temperature globally. So it is just to indicate that at the global level, we have data sets that we can continentalize to detect climate change at the continental or even national level. And that these data sets are assimilation of station observations and other data sources. And the effort to rescue historical records will be used to update this reanalysis. Then another important use of rescued data is actually this assessment of the warming, particularly the warming rate. So in this plot, what you have in red is the warming rate in North Africa, which is for us the most important part in terms of high temperatures and heat waves for Africa. One can see easily that by analyzing a historical record, we can detect the specific hazards of interest to different regions in Africa, and then identify those hazards on which we should focus when we build this continental multi-hazard advisory and warnings. This is also a second important element, came from our discussions with the users for the energy sector. Basically, the idea here is to look at the trends in terms of number of very hot days during the year over Africa. This can be done at a city level, actually, to understand what are the trends on those very hot days and what are the implications in terms of energy demands that the city, country should consider for that specific location. So it shows clearly that over the past 40 years, we have tripled the number of very hot days on average over Africa. But as I said, this should be done, and specifically by national meteorological services in the countries. We should train them to do this at the city scale in their country. So I'm saying all this to highlight the complementarity effort, because in a lot of community during the past 2 weeks, we heard a lot of, okay, are you not duplicating what is done at national level? Are you not duplicating what is done at the sub-regional level? And we should all work, we have a work there to specifically explain how complementarity comes in the delivery of our products and services. Yeah, so this basically could be of use at the African Union level, essentially. To get it used at the IGAD level, it has to be regenerated over the IGAD countries. So it also highlights that high temperatures and heat waves should be part of our priority hazards for monitoring and forecasting. Now, this is heavy rainfall. There again, every year we look at the surface of Africa that is hit by heavy rainfall every year, and then run it until recently. And you can see here also that for heavy rainfall, we move from about 4% of the African land masses in the early 80s to up to 40% in 2020. So we have a 10-time increase on the surface of Africa hit by heavy rainfall between the early 80s and now. And to put this at the country level, this year in Nigeria, more than half of the states were hit by floods. So those figures are not fiction. And when more than half of the states were hit by floods, the consequences, the impact has been devastating. More than 1 million people were impacted. And so we are saying that at the continental level, we have a setup which indicate that we should care about heavy rainfall. So we have already identified two specific hazards. High temperatures and heat waves, particularly over North Africa, and then floods at the continental level, because in this case, we have up to 40% of the surface of Africa hit by floods in this year 2020. So if there is a hazard that should be tackled at the continental level, it is actually flood, because it is widespread all across the continent. Then we have another parameter, which is the start of the agricultural season. So we came out over the past year with situations where discussions at the local level with subsistence farmers shows that we should look again on the definitions we are using to actually monitor this parameter. We have developed this product, and it is generated at the continental level every two weeks, and updating the situation in terms of how the season has started and progressively during the season. And this other information is also at the continental level with just a limited number of stations. As you know, at the country level, we have in different agricultural belts network of observations with records. And those actually are the ones that should be used to regenerate these products at the country level in those locations. For example, our idea was to consider the agriculture, the peanuts, groundnuts belt of Senegal, because groundnuts is one agricultural commodity from that country, to run these over stations that have been there for many decades in the agricultural belt, in the groundnut belt of Senegal. So this is a specific case of impact forecasting and then early action planning. But it didn't go until implementation of the updated plan. So for the summer season in West Africa, July, August, September, we have the forecast of the climate, expected climate anomaly, which is precipitation above to well above average during the season expected, and then the hazard, expected hazard, which was in this case heavy rainfall potentially leading to floods in actually a large area over northern Nigeria. And on the other side, on your, it's on my right, you would see output of a collaboration between ACMAT and the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And that output actually mapped over different regions the percentage of population that were expected to be affected by floods. And from this estimated percentage, an update of the emergency plan and the related budget for implementation was done. But this was kept at the regional level within OSHA. The countries impacted, their civil protection or national disaster management agencies has to be, this year we have to get them involved in this process. And in some countries, the platforms for disaster risk reduction are established. We'll need to operationalize this platform by making sure that this information is shared with them, discussed with them, for their emergency actions to be considered, updated, and implemented. So this is what impact forecasting actually should look like, moving from the climate anomaly to the expected hazards, the potential impact, and the measures that can be proposed to address this impact, and using these measures to update available emergency plans and budget it. So that's a second case. Now it's for the upcoming, let's say, four months. The activity in terms of rainfall is now over Central Africa. So we have done the same. Where you see a color tending to black are the areas where we are expecting up to 20% of the population to be affected by floods in the upcoming 4 months. And in addition to that, we also monitor the water levels in the basins over those locations. And this helps us to actually monitor and anticipate the high water levels during the season. So this has been subject of discussions, and we had a meeting with OSHA a few days ago to actually build the updated emergency plan based on that impact information. Okay. So these are, let's say, just slides to highlight the need for us to actually collect data and work towards this effort. So this is what historical records look like in our country. So that's, for example, this map that you have on the slide is, is a historical record, and we put it just to highlight the fact that given the status on which they were, it is almost impossible to automate the digitalization process. We definitely need to hire people who just do the key entry to get this data available. Okay, I think that's all. This is just a summary. You're highlighting the, let's say, the upcoming actions that we are considering in this process, and which can be shared and probably rediscussed with the partners to see how best to implement them. Okay. So, thank you, sir.
Merci, Dr. André. Merci à tous pour votre attention. Nous allons poursuivre rapidement avec Docteur. Merci. Je sais que l'autre a une conférence tout de suite.
Good morning. My name is Hussein. I work at the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center based in Nairobi, Kenya. I'll be sharing with you the advances in climate prediction over the Greater Horn of Africa region, focusing on the tailored and user-specific climate products that we produce at the Regional Climate Center. Briefly about our organization, the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center. ICPAC. ICPAC is the Intergovernmental Authority on Development Climate Prediction Center for the Eastern Africa. IGAD is one of the African Union regional economic blocs, and ICPAC is it is the designated World Meteorological Climate Center for the Eastern Africa. Our mandate is to provide climate services to enhance the resilience of community for the Greater Horn of Africa region. Okay, one of the achievements that has been made in the region is this implementation of this objective seasonal forecasting for the region. The first objective forecast was produced in May 2019, and this objective forecast is important and based on WMO's recommendation for the regional and national climate centers to produce a forecast that is traceable, reproducible, and verifiable. What does it mean? For the past 20 years, ICPAC has been, and other regional and national meteorological agencies has been producing a consensus-based climate outlook. That consensus-based climate outlook is not verifiable if you want to verify and look at the skill of the forecast. It is not also reproducible. It is not also available in digital form and cannot be used in application models, so if you want to use it. So since we started this one, we are producing it for the last 3 years, and the data is available, the techniques are documented, well documented, available, so it will help us to improve also the forecast in the future. So this is a major achievement. And the other key products that we produce for the region is the extreme rainfall forecast. The Eastern Africa is one of the most vulnerable regions to this climate extremes, floods and droughts. Currently, we are experiencing the 5th below average rainfall season in the region. And at the same time also we are experiencing floods in some parts of the region. So this kind of extreme rainfall forecast is very important for disaster preparedness and early action. So at ICPAC, we produce this one every week, and we disseminate it to different users. The other product that we started producing is the heat stress product. We know that temperature is increasing, and in future, we are expecting more increase in temperature. So heat stress will be one of the climate hazards that we are expecting in the region because of a changing climate. And this is a very useful product, again, for decision making for the region. We are producing it every week using the 10-kilometer WRF simulation that we run at our center. The other important and very relevant product is a prediction of the tropical cyclone track. We know tropical cyclones, they occur once in a while, but when they occur, they are very devastating. For example, the East Africa region, or the parts of the Indian Ocean, we have observed very frequent tropical cyclones in 2018, 2019, and also in 2020. And also in future, because of this, the increase in temperature over the ocean, we are likely to have more frequent and intense tropical cyclone. So when tropical cyclones start developed over the nearby ocean, we produce that the track of the tropical cyclone, which includes what time, where will be making a landfall, and also the rainfall and also the associated winds. So this is again a very useful product for the humanitarian agencies to reduce the impacts of the tropical cyclone. The other very useful product, particularly for the agriculture sector, is the start of the rainfall season. Users want to know what time, when will be the rainfall starting. Is there a dry spell between the start of the rainfall season and also maybe the other rainfall that will be starting after the onset? So we provide onset dates, which dates the onset will be starting at regional level, and compare it with the historical or with the normal periods in the past. Is the onset going to be early or late? This again is very useful for the users, so they know what kind of crops they need to plant. And also users asked more information, not only the anomalies. They want to know what will be the probability of the delayed onset, early onset. Because predictions, they are not perfect. There is uncertainty associated with different issues. So that onset probability that you see on the right shows you the probability of an early or a delayed onset at regional level. Again, at ICPAC, we work with the different users. We value users' feedback. We share our products. They give us feedback, and it will help us to improve it. So while we are discussing with our users, one thing they requested is they want to know also the probability of exceeding threshold. That is important because if a water resource person, they want to know what will be the rainfall exceeding 200 millimeter or 300 millimeter to fill the dam. And agriculture sector, they want to know the amount of rainfall exceeding a certain threshold. So they require that information because it will help them to make decision what kind of crops they need to plant. So maize might be may require a different threshold. Maybe 200 millimeter in a season might be enough, but wheat, it requires another threshold. So this is again another useful product that we produce based on users' feedback. So we are not just producing the products and stop there. We also use different channels to disseminate our products. So one of the platforms that we use, the East Africa Hazard Watch, and also the agriculture monitoring tool. These are specialized tools that developed to help users to access and also generate products for their specific areas. So here you can see two tools. One is the agriculture hotspot mapping tool. This is a very useful tool for cropland and also rangeland monitoring. And is developed under the EU-funded the CLIMSA program by Joint Research Center. The other is this climate station is another also a very useful tool to produce user-tailored products. So a climate station, you have data, different data sets, environmental data sets, climate data sets, and also you can easily produce sector-specific products using that tool. So about the East Africa Hazard Watch, it is an automated multi-sectoral risk analysis tool that enables users to visualize and also produce products at their area of interest. So all the products that I mentioned earlier, from this objective seasonal climate outlook, the monthly, the weekly forecast, and also this cropland and agriculture related products, they are accessible from the East Africa Hazard Watch. One important thing is the user, they can produce these products again in their area of interest, so not only at a regional level. So that is all I have. Thank you very much.
Merci, docteur. On va terminer cette session avec la présentation du docteur.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate Dr. Andre and Dr. Hussein for making life very easy for me. So I'll try to just focus on specific topics without repeating any part. Colleagues, as we know, the real issue is now how can we advance from weather forecasting to weather forecasting into impact forecasting, I think, as also highlighted by previous speakers. One of actually the advances in the last 2 years that has happened in Africa and in IGAD also is the establishment of these dedicated situation rooms. It's actually one of the dispensations that are available to us to advance, for instance, what's launched last week on early warning for all. So we are much ahead. This puts us in a good position, particularly as IGAD and ICPAC, not only the infrastructure, but also we have in-house tools that really talks to early warning for all. So this center came actually before we launched it with Africa Union and other partners. Our heads of states have asked for IGAD to establish and operationalize a multi-hazard situation room in one of their extraordinary summits. We are very much lucky enough to work with UNDRR, Africa Union Commission, and of course funding from Italian government to establish this situation room. The idea is basically, as IGAD, I think one of the strong points that we have is our climate center, the ICPAC, which provides quite important and quite improving services like the objective forecast that Dr. Hussein has mentioned. These are the most important elements that particularly helps to monitor, but also forecast the weather, the hazards, but also try to understand the impacts in terms of setting thresholds and triggers. In that regard also, I think we are currently supporting WFP in Uganda, in Kenya, and partly in Djibouti to try to set thresholds and triggers for specific hazards in a specific location. I think that is exactly what we mean by impact-based forecasting and forecast-based action. So those are the progresses that have been made a year or so ago. Our idea from IGAD is to start with 4 major hazards in the region: the droughts, the floods, the pests, particularly focusing on agricultural pests, but also food security. In the second tier, or in the second phase, we are also looking at landslides, epidemics, cyclone, we are already doing it, but also on forest fire or wildfire. I think, as I said, I think Hussein has talked about this one, but this is one of the brilliant tools that we have at ICPAC, which is in-house, open source, providing the different hazards and works that we have been undertaking at ICPAC, starting with the climate components, but also looking at, for instance, the agricultural watch, focusing on crop monitor as well as range monitor, which are very important for that part of the world, because 80% of our people are engaged in agricultural activities, and monitoring our croplands, our rangelands is quite instrumental if we have to understand and also put in place appropriate preparedness and also response measures. So this is a launching pad, which you can access it at East African Hazards Watch, where you can find quite a number of things. Agriculture is just one. The desert locust, for example, when it was active, we try to understand the climatic parameters that are helping the desert locust to navigate from one part of the region to the other. The drought watch also, actually one of the flagship products that is available for Eastern Africa is the drought watch, quite used extensively, looking at 3 parameters, the rainfall anomaly, vegetation anomaly, but also soil moisture anomaly. Brilliantly, we have also crafted what we call a combined drought index, trying to combine 3 of them and see where our hotspots are for a particular time, 10 days, a month, or a season. The beauty of it is you can go back like 20 years and see the time series analysis. I think that's brilliant. For example, the current ongoing devastating droughts, if you want to understand what's really happening, for example, in northern Kenya, just you put the time series and you see when did it start and how it was progressing since August 2020 rather. These are some of the products. The Drought Watch is this one, very interactive. I really invite you to look at these platforms. It was earlier developed with JRC at the beginning, but we have advanced it actually with our in-house developers, quite a number of tools and features. If you look at, quite a number of, parameters and indicators have been monitored. The one I was the one I was referring to, I think I have to be a bit slower. The one I was referring to, the time series, is that one. I think very interactive and very informative. So I invite you maybe to visit the East African Hazard Watch and see. My colleague Hussein has talked about this one, particularly the rangelands, and it's not just a map, colleagues. It's very interactive. You can click and see the time series for smaller localities. I think that is the beauty of it. Going forward, I think the food security, for now, we don't have our in-house tools, but I think we are working along that line. We are using the global IPC platform particularly to see the different grades of food insecurity, which is again very informative and substantive. I'm a bit faster than my mouse. Apologies. This is also the desert locust when it was active. Now I think it's declared non-emergency for that region. But again, there have been efforts at ICPAC trying to understand the patterns and the upsurge of desert locust during that time. I think one of the most important elements of transitioning from weather forecasting, not transitioning, but advancing from weather forecasting to impact forecasting, is developing risk profiles. The one you see here is a regional flood risk profile, which we completed early this year. You might be interested to look at the findings of the model, for example. Floods alone displaces about 1.3 million people every year in that part of the region. That's on average. Affecting about 2 million people, again, in the IGAD region, in the Eastern Africa region. Maybe Dr. Andre will be interested to see what for the entire Africa. So flood is one of the most important, most frequent disasters in Eastern Africa, and I'm sure also for Africa. The other one you see in the right side is the displacement risk profile. I think one of the immediate impacts of floods is displacement. So we try to understand risk of displacement due to floods. We have also recently completed due to the slow onset events like drought. So those are, I think, very important policy instruments in our disposal to advise policies with respect to how to prevent, but also manage displacement due to disasters. Going forward, also we try to see displacement in the current and future climate scenarios. What are we looking at in terms of displacement or expecting to happen in the future? Particularly, the one thing we know for sure is with climate change, extreme climate events like drought and floods are going to increase. I think that's what the recent IPCC report is telling us, which means that we need to understand to what extent is that increment or that devastation, particularly for Eastern Africa region, which is, as we usually say, an epitome of disaster crisis. This is again for loss and damage, particularly focusing on the road infrastructure, what we have now and what for the future, particularly looking at the anomalies, which are the hotspots of the damages to the infrastructure in current and future climate. Let me summarize by saying this. I think those of you who attended yesterday in the US center, you have seen this one. Basically, this is what or where we want to navigate. We are, I think, advancing the climate forecast, which is brilliant, and I think our scientists will keep on doing that. But as we do that, I think we have to also think about transitioning and advancing towards forecasting the impacts. The way we model, for example, displacement, the way we model the floods. I think that is very, very important. What the weather will do would be very, very essential, and risk profiles are, I think, the elements that will help us transition towards that. Then, whenever we have an impact forecasting, the immediate benefit is having an actionable, precise, early warning information, which are very clear on what the communities or local governments need to do. This will lead us to, of course, it will inform early action, but also, most importantly, the anticipatory actions. So we act in anticipation. That requires actually pre-identifying the actions, but also pre-positioning the finance. Okay, so we are acting actually in anticipation, not after we see the disaster. These are basically based on exceedance of specific thresholds for different hazards, which are actually, I'll talk in the next slide. One research is telling us that the investment on early warnings, here you can read, investments on early warnings and early actions have or has tenfold return in benefit in investment, particularly for Africa. So I think that is what we need to stress, and that's why the early warnings are quite important. We prevent or reduce the impacts, even the damage to our infrastructure, key service facilities, but also the loss, whether that's human life or whatever precious to us or any element at risk. Then end-to-end and people-centered early warning, I think we have to admit, is at a very, very early stage. Because there is a significant difference between releasing a forecast information and providing a precise, actionable, people-centered early warning information. For us, we feel that we are on the line, but there is a lot to be done, particularly in terms of advancing investments, but also strengthening institutions, making sure that resources are available, particularly to African institutions. The pledges that we hear, for example, for early warning for all, we are very much looking forward, particularly this to trickle down to such good institutions like ACMAD or ICPAC and so on. Particularly African institutions are looking, and it will be very important to make sure that the resources are available to advance our capacities. The second last point is the continental and regional success. As I said, I think it really puts us in a good, advanced stage in establishing a situation room in Africa Union, at ACMAD and at ICPAC. The plan for us is actually to establish similar situation rooms in our member countries, at 7 or 8 member countries of IGAD. The discussion have been started, at least for South Sudan and Somalia. Things are, I think, in the pipeline. We want to establish similar situation rooms for all IGAD countries. Finally, I think all initiatives, I'm going to repeat this, particularly on early warnings during this COP or outside of COP, particularly must ensure that Africa and its institutions have a co-leading role and have a direct access, particularly to the resources that are available and pledged for reaching the world or reaching everyone with early warnings within the coming 5 years. I'll rest my case there, and thank you very much.
Yeah. Merci, Dr Ahmed. Merci bien. Je sais que vous avez une présentation tout à l'heure. Oui, je sais que vous avez une présentation tout à l'heure. Alors, vous avez suivi les 3 panélistes et c'est le temps maintenant de ceux qui ont des éclaircissements à demander, des questions, des suggestions. C'est bien le moment. Oui, bien sûr. Allez-y.
Bonjour, merci monsieur le modérateur. Je remercie les panélistes pour ces très bonnes informations. Vraiment, merci beaucoup pour ces avancées dans la sous-région ou dans le continent africain en général. Donc en fait, j'ai quelques éclaircissements à demander au niveau du système multi-risque qui a été présenté par le dernier panéliste. Il a parlé de quatre risques. Donc le risque d'inondation, les risques liés aux pesticides, les risques de sécheresse. Ensuite, il a parlé d'un 4e risque qui, à mon avis, c'est la conséquence des autres risques. C'est le risque de sécheresse. En fait, la sécurité alimentaire. La sécurité alimentaire, pour moi, c'est vraiment la déclinaison de l'impact des autres risques. Parce que je n'imagine pas une année de sécheresse et qui débouchera par exemple à une sécurité alimentaire dans la sous-région. Donc j'aimerais juste comprendre les paramètres qui sont utilisés pour... Est-ce que c'est différent de ceux qui sont utilisés pour décrire les autres risques, notamment les risques d'inondation et celui de sécheresse, qui sont les principaux risques quand même qui conduisent à l'insécurité alimentaire. Et toujours par rapport à cette présentation, vous avez parlé de la prévision d'impact. J'aimerais avoir juste une idée. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous décrire sommairement la méthodologie à partir de la connaissance des risques, comment on procédera à la prévision de l'impact? Merci beaucoup. J'ai oublié de me présenter. Je m'appelle Hamatan Mohamed. Je suis expert hydrologue au centre régional Agrimet, basé à Niamey.
Merci, Mohamed. Question? C'est compris. Hein? Ils ont tout compris. Vous avez tout compris. C'est bon, pas de suggestion non plus. Allez, on va passer aux panélistes. Vous allez répondre. C'est Dr Hussein.
Ok, donc je vais Je vais répondre en français pour que ce soit bien compris et prendre le cas de l'hydrologie. En réalité, les fortes précipitations, ce n'est pas un risque, c'est un aléa. Okay? Donc, on part du fait que pour construire le profil de risque, vous appuyez sur les données historiques et du phénomène, c'est-à-dire des fortes pluies ou bien des hautes eaux, et de l'impact. Et vous arrivez à dire, si j'ai un niveau d'eau de niveau 1, c'est-à-dire par exemple un certain seuil, à ça correspond un certain pourcentage de la population de telle localité qui pourrait être affectée. Donc au fur et à mesure que vous augmentez en catégorie ou en intensité de l'aléa, vous avez un pourcentage ou bien un impact, un pourcentage de population affectée ou bien une valeur économique perdue. Et c'est tout simplement ça le profil de risque. Et puis par la suite, quand vous faites votre prévision, vous prévoyez la catégorie attendue de l'aléa. À cette catégorie est associé donc avec le profil de risque un niveau d'impact. C'est ça la prévision des impacts, tout simplement. Mais le défi qu'il y a à l'implémenter, c'est la disponibilité des données historiques, aussi bien les données sur les aléas que sur les impacts. Et c'est là où se trouvent en général les défis. Et ce qu'on disait, c'est qu'il nous faut ensemble travailler avec les services les instituts nationaux de statistiques et puis les services météorologiques pour disposer et des données climatiques et des données sur les impacts. Et c'est très bien de poser cette question. Ça permet de mettre en évidence ce besoin et le gap que nous devons combler.
Thank you very much. I think that is a brilliant question. I fully agree with you that food security is the cumulative impacts of disasters, whether that's floods, conflicts, drought, or so on. But we had a reason when we designed those 4 key priorities for IGAD. The idea was actually to design a regional food security assessment methodology. So, okay, the IPC is good, but some of our member states are disowning it. If you see the current map, some of the countries are empty because they are not buying into that methodology. So as IGAD, we have envisioned, particularly through our food security unit, to try to identify and design our own regional system, which also talks to the global, but also national indicators. So that's why we consider food security to be one of the key priorities in that graph which we showed. Thank you.
D'autres questions? Oui. Ah, oui, il y avait...
Good morning. I'm from the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership. I think we've had a chance to speak before of this global initiative to better connect the global data to the local level. So everything that you've presented today is extremely relevant. And as you know, the United Nations has launched the Early Warning for All initiative. So I'm just very curious to know from you, just what are the challenges from your side to make sure that all this amazing information actually reaches the local end users? What are, from your perspectives, just maybe one of the main challenges you're facing to actually get the information to the end user? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am Dr. Sisai Sinamo from Ministry of Health, Ethiopia. My question goes to Dr. Ahmed. Thank you for the presentation. I can see the risk assessment, the risk prediction basically goes to the food and also drought and other conditions. But also East Africa has also a lot of challenges in terms of disease outbreaks. From where I come from, Ministry of Health, Ethiopia, one of our concern is also the malaria outbreak. in terms of predictability, not only for Ethiopia but also other East African countries? Do you have similar tools for the health outbreaks, specifically for malaria and other diseases related to climate change? Thank you.
Alors, dernière réponse, sa dernière série de réponses.
Yeah, on the challenge to make the products reach the last mile, we'll say that there are two issues. First of all, make the project tailored to the needs at that last mile. It's not always the case. And secondly, to map and operationalize networks. Here in particularly, I'm talking about the disaster risk reduction platforms that we have established as continental, regional, and national level. They should be much more operationalized in the sense that they should be the body where we have all the actors in the chain available, fit by information, and then that information is used for planning, for coordination, and then for actually operationally supporting the people who are in need. The UN Sendai framework has succeeded in establishing this platform, but there is a need to work together to effectively operationalize them. Thank you.
C'est bon.
Yeah, just to add on what Dr. Andre said, one challenge to reach the last mile users is our communities, they don't have these smartphones, they don't have the internet, they don't have this. So it's a big challenge to reach the last mile users selling the platforms that we have shared here. The East Africa Hazard Watch or which social media or whichever, our last mile users, they don't have the opportunity to use this platform. So that is a major challenge, but we are trying to reach them through radio and other platforms that they can easily access. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think one question, thank you, Dr. Sisai. I think that is very much well noted. On the graph, I think in the second phase, we want to expand the hazard monitoring to pandemics and epidemics. So I do hope that will work very much closely when we reach there. Gavin, ICPAC sits in the advisory board of RIP, which we are very proud of on what you're doing. Particularly on reaching the last mile, as I reflected, I think three things are quite essential. Number one is the institutions. That's why I'm saying this establishment of situation rooms is an advance, but I think that has to be the same or replicated at a national and subnational level. So we are really very much expecting a lot from the global centers to make resources available, which is the second point, to regional centers like ICPAC, but also national centers, so that in terms of infrastructure, in terms of systems, these things are at advanced stage. So that's the most important point for me. Thank you.
Alors, merci. Vraiment, on est venu nous signaler qu'on était déjà... Hein? On a débordé.
Thank you very much, panelists. My name is Geoffrey Sabiti. I work with ICPAC. The first quick concern goes to Dr. Andre. In terms of the impact-based forecasting, I think it will be a lot data intensive in terms of the localized climate information, but also the socio-economic data. Is there any initiative trying to help in terms of data sharing across the different member countries that can help maybe in the actualization or operationalization of this at scale? Then has this also been adopted by member countries so that at least as the region transitions, the member countries are also transitioning? And what have been some of the key benefits of this forecast in terms of accuracy and reliability?
Last question.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to also thank the panelists for a very informative presentation. And really, as an African, I'm proud of the development and the stage where we have arrived. So my question is on the uptake of the information. Yes, it was asked in the form of reaching the last mile, but even is that the issue of reaching out? What is the perception of the end users? What is the perception of even various institutions and experts of the information and products, climate information that's generated? How do they see it? Because some are coming from continental level, some are from the regional bodies, and the national institutions are also there. The issue of credibility, trust of the source of the message, all these are there, are at play. Thank you.
Yeah, on the issue of data, making sure that we granularize and then generate what is needed at the local level. I think the first effort that we see we are pushing to implement is to connect better the National Meteorological Services with the National Institute of Statistics. Because in the two organizations, on one hand, we have the climate data. On the other, we have socioeconomic data sets. Make sure that those servers that hold those two data sets talk to each other. Do the same thing at the regional level and at the continental level. At the continental level, we have the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, which works with us, and our priority next year is to work towards building that relationship. Then on the issue of the uptake, actually at the continental level, the target users for our products are continental level organizations, and up to some extent, regional organizations that take care of more than one regional economic community. For example, in this case with UN OSHA, it is a bureau of OSHA which take care of Central and West Africa. Then in the regions like IGAD, the main user is also these regional bodies, the main final user. And then all of us, we have the responsibility to support the National Meteorological Services to update their methods, their tools, and their products. So that's how it's structured.
Thank you for that question about this accuracy and reliability of the objective forecast and whether the member states are able to adopt it or not. On the accuracy, we started this objective forecast in 2019, and we have about 10 sample size, so it's not big enough to say objective forecast is improving the accuracy of the forecast. But it has many advantages compared to the consensus approach. One is you can verify this forecast, so you know whether there is an improvement in the skill or not. With the subjective or with the consensus approach, you don't know because it depends on the expert. So expert says, okay, in this area because of this driver, it is a likelihood of above or below average rainfall. So if that forecast is generated by another expert, it is likely to be slightly different because it is subjective. But in objective forecast, the method is documented, the models, the data that you are is documented. So even if another expert comes after 5 years and produce the forecast using the same technique and the same data, he should come up with the same outlook. So it is important to verify and also to improve the forecast. So that is one. Then the other is the data is available in digital form. So if you want to use it in water or agriculture models, you can easily use that data. About the adoption of the method by member states, in ICPAC, in every year, we have this foundational climate prediction and modeling training workshop, which is held every November. And all now the IGAD member states, they have access to the ICPAC computing cluster. So they have access the system, they have access to the data, they have access to the tool and the methods. So I can say most countries now, the objective approach is one of the input for their consensus climate outlook. And some countries are already producing the forecast using the objective, but not all. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Voilà. Ceci, normalement, met fin, tonton, s'il vous plaît. S'il vous plaît. Met fin donc à la série à cette session.
The study was called
testing. Okay. Big crowd here, so I need to be loud. We will have Donald's kind of video presentation. That's the only one here. And yeah, it's going to be hard for you guys to see, but you'll see it. There's the two screens. Oh, yeah, there you go. Okay, perfect. I was wondering. Good call, good catch. Yeah, I'll sit over here. Yeah, you want to move over just a little bit, and that way I'll put this up right there. Yeah. Thanks you. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this great event on pathways to low emission and resilient livestock agri-food systems in Africa. It might be the last session, but I think it's going to be one of the most important and engaging sessions because we have some really big issues to talk about today. My name's Michael Victor. I'm the head of communications at the International Livestock Research Institute, and I'm really excited to be here today. We're going to be talking about livestock, and livestock is sometimes the forgotten subject in agriculture in Africa. And that's even though livestock is the fastest growing sector in Africa, helping to feed the continent, ensure food security, and livelihood opportunities for hundreds of millions of people. The sector faces a lot of pressures in terms of from Western concerns to reduce methane emissions, even though African countries consume far less meat and generate very little of the emissions generated throughout the world compared to Western countries. And this sometimes can be simplistically framed by saying, we need to eat less, we need to consume less, we need to stop using animal source foods, we need to reduce our numbers. And such arguments often reduce livestock to a commodity, but really don't take into account the diversity of livestock systems and the benefits that livestock provide, particularly in Africa, and the way people relate to their animals in Africa as well. So in the African context, we know livestock is used for multiple purposes, both material and cultural, and disruptions of the livestock sector would really have a profound effect on the lives and livelihoods of small-scale farmers and livestock keepers, who are really the backbone of the continent's food production. That said, I think we all agree livestock has to improve efficiencies and reduce emissions, and implementing these improvements will really have the benefit of adaptation and allow the continent to reduce emissions, but really support farmers through the climate crisis. And that's what we want to see. The important thing is food security and adaptation, but how do we do that in a sustainable way to have a triple win? So that's what we want to explore today. And this meeting is really about what they're starting to call a just transition. And we want to really explore what that means. What are the trade-offs? What are the opportunities? What are the synergies that we can find between different agendas that we're seeing, between climate security, social justice, food security, and livelihoods? So this session will kind of lay out some of the issues, and we're going to hear from people who are directly affected by some of these ideas and what they're thinking and what do they see as visions for the future. So we're really excited to have this, and I think we have a great panel today. And before we get started, I'm just going to introduce everybody so everybody knows who's here. First, we have Todd Crane, who's a principal scientist at the International Livestock Research Institute, and he's working in the Sustainable Livestock Systems Program. And he leads really kind of an interdisciplinary research centered around the social dimensions of climate change adaptation and mitigation in livestock systems. And this ranges from the burdens and benefits of adaptation and mitigation and the practices within the household to the science and policy interactions that we're seeing today. We have Ruri Peter, who is the Executive Director of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And he has an MSc in Tropical Animal Production and Health from the Veterinary Faculty in Edinburgh. And he spent much of his career supporting small-scale farmer and investments in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Today we don't have him here, but we'll have a presentation by Donald Moore, who's the Executive Director from the Global Dairy Platform. He's worked for many years in the information and technology business and consulting arenas. And he's held a variety of general management and strategic marketing roles. This includes working for the Frontiera Cooperative Group and is the Chief Executive of New Zealand's largest independent business and information management consulting firm. We also have here with us Elizabeth Akaba, who's a farmer and also a women's association leader, and she's from Ghana, Tuba, Ghana. She's from the suburban town in Greater Africa, in the Greater Accra region, which is Soweto. She's the child of proud farmers, and she studied agriculture at Kwasadao Agriculture College in Kumasi, where her knowledge of crop production and greatly improved. She owns 3 hectares of her own farmland, and she's also the head of the Tuba Women's Farmer Association as well. And she's working with the Accelerating Impacts of CGIAR Climate Research for Africa, known as ICRA. We also have Roba. We also have Roba Makuri Abakiri, and she's a pastoralist from the Afar region in Ethiopia. She's a lecturer and researcher in Ethiopia as well. She's one of the core leads at the Climate Smart Agriculture Youth Network Global Association, and that includes the African Youth Pastoralist Initiative in Ethiopia, where she's also a resident of the Ethiopian cluster. She's worked in a number of international research organizations and advocacy organizations, and is also working on her own research. And finally, we have Bernard Kimuro, who is the head of the Climate Change and Livestock Sustainability Division of the State Department of Livestock under the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development. He's worked in livestock development for 20 years, really focusing on animal health and nutrition, and really looking at the greenhouse gas emissions and the policy issues related to climate change and livestock in Kenya. So we really have a diverse crowd to really discuss this issue of how can we continue to grow the livestock sector in a sustainable way, and whilst reaching these emissions areas. So with that, I'm going to hand it over first to Todd Crane, who's kind of going to set us up and give us a framing of what we mean by the just transition.
Check. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning on this last day of COP27. I want to talk today about, thank you. The concept of just transitions originates from the energy sector, where the climate change imperative points toward a necessary and urgent shift in the way energy is produced and consumed, but wants to account for the kind of distributional effect of how the burdens of that shift are experienced, how are people in that sector, their livelihoods affected. And I've been reading about this, and I started thinking, well, how does this apply to livestock development in Africa especially? The livestock sector globally is changing, responding to the climate imperative, the urgent need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and indeed in response to consumer demand, partly stimulated by that fact. Yet when we look around the world, livestock sectors vary widely depending on where they are. We have a huge range of what constitutes livestock and animal source food production. And when, especially coming from an institution based in Africa, looking at largely in African livestock systems, we see oftentimes the politics in industrialized countries, in the EU, in the United States, point toward a reluctance to invest in development in African livestock sectors, because the politics back home say we need to be reducing animal source foods, we need to reduce emissions from the livestock sector, and then try and export those principles, that perspective, to Africa. However, recognizing that the consumption of animal source foods is substantially greater, sometimes an order of magnitude greater in industrial countries compared to regions in Africa, it points toward the importance of taking a different perspective here, that reducing emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in the livestock sector from industrial production is not inconsistent with investing in the development of the livestock sector in Africa. I propose that a just transition perspective emphasizes the differences in these systems and in any production systems around the world. It emphasizes the access to nutritional security and the differences that are found across different regions of the world, and prioritizes getting globally improved access to nutritional security that livestock products contribute to substantially, especially in Africa, where we still see substantial nutritional insecurity, especially relating to protein and micronutrients, and especially in the very important first 1,000 days, where access to livestock and animal source foods can make a huge difference in the cognitive development of a child that ripple through their entire lives. So I'd like to just close with an emphasis that we can accept the critiques and the urgent mandate to reduce GHG emissions from industrial livestock sectors in the global north, and invest in the development and adaptation, climate change adaptation in the livestock sectors in Africa as being a very consistent position if we look at it from a climate justice perspective.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Todd. And I think you kind of laid out that this just transition is not a silver bullet, and it's not kind of applicable all over the world. It has to be a very granular, very diverse kind of transition that recognizes diversity of systems and really places justice and food security and nutrition at the heart of it, and not just the reduction of emissions. So I think we're going to hear from Donald now on the video screen. So he has a short presentation looking at dairy in East Africa and the pathway to low emissions there. So could we roll that up? Great.
Good day, everyone. My name's Donald Moore. I'm the Executive Director at the Global Dairy Platform, and it's my pleasure to speak to you today about adaptation and transformation in the dairy sector and about our Pathways to Dairy Net Zero initiative. So if I may start a little bit of background to this particular initiative. As a dairy sector, we have for some time now, for around 10 years, we've been tracking and recording the progress of sustainability across the dairy sector. And back in 2018, 2019, we commissioned, as part of that work, we commissioned this study with FAO to help us understand the dairy sector's emissions. The study was called Climate Change and the Global Dairy Cattle Sector. And this study tracked the dairy sector performance over a 10-year period from 2005 to 2015. And in that time period, the emission intensity of dairy all over the world had dropped by 11%, but at the same time, absolute production in dairy had increased by 30%, which meant that the absolute emissions had gone up by around 18%. And the authors noted if we hadn't made some of the progress we'd made in the dairy sector, our absolute emissions would actually have gone up by around 38%. So from a dairy sector perspective, we felt that was at least some good news in terms of the ability for us to reduce the emission intensity in all regions in the world, but a recognition that we needed to do more to tackle absolute emissions themselves. That led us in early 2021 to launch Pathways to Dairy Net Zero, and it's a collaboration of 6 organizations, shown there on the screen: Global Dairy Platform, International Dairy Federation, the International Livestock Research Institute, IFCN, Dairy Research Network, SAI Platform, and the Dairy Sustainability Framework. And we work very closely with the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases as our knowledge partner, and we've got support from FAO through a partnership agreement with Global Dairy Platform. So what are we trying to do in Pathways to Dairy Net Zero? Well, the first thing we do is we recognize that in order to tackle climate change from the dairy sector, we have to be careful that we don't trade one environmental outcome off against another. So in looking to reduce emissions from the dairy sector, we have to be careful that we don't create a problem in biodiversity or in some other realm of environmental outcomes. And equally, we have to be careful that we don't create problems in nutritional security, livelihoods, economic growth, etc. So it's a complex problem we have to balance. Equally, we know that not every dairy system in the world is the same. There are no 2 farms identical. And therefore, we have to understand the different system topologies, the different farming systems in all regions in the world, so that we can develop pathways that are suitable for each of those dairy systems. And then ultimately, we want to stimulate action and commitment. As I said, we launched this initiative just prior to COP last year during the UN Food Systems Summit. And since then, we've had over 140 organizations join Pathways to Dairy Net Zero. We have not only the 10 biggest dairy companies in the world, but many smaller dairy companies, many governments, academic institutions, and other supporters of the dairy sector have joined this initiative. So what are we trying to do right at the moment? Well, within Pathways to Dairy Net Zero, there are really two streams of activity. The first one is around research, and in there I will share with you in a moment some of the latest research, but it's very much about defining those different farming systems, looking at what are the most beneficial mitigation options for those different systems, and then modeling the impact that those mitigations will have out to 2030 and then to 2050, so that we get an understanding of the impact that we can have by implementing this program. And then the second part of our actions in 2022 has really been about execution and delivering. And in the developed dairy markets, it's been about how do we create greater collaboration and push forward the boundaries of research and understanding about the impacts on climate change and what we can do within the dairy system. And in the emerging markets, it's really been focused on how do we identify key emerging markets as early adopters to this program, and then help them prepare submissions to organizations like the Green Climate Fund to support the funding necessary for transformation in the dairy sector. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But before I do, I thought it was useful if I just touched briefly on some of the latest research that's come out of the program. This chart represents all the countries in the world. Each blue dot is a country. Along the x-axis on the bottom, you've got the amount of milk produced per cow per year, and on the y-axis up the side, you've got the amount of emissions per kilogram of milk produced. And so you'll notice on the left-hand side of the slide, you have relatively low producing, high emitting systems in some countries. And then on the right-hand side, you've got some very high producing, low emitting per kilogram of product. What we know from the research work conducted with FAO is that about 80% of the emissions from the dairy sector globally sit in those lower producing dairy systems, many of them in emerging economies. And so back to this farm system topology development, and if we were to characterize the systems as we've done here into 6 basic system types, from pastoral and agropastoral through to high input, high output, what we've been able to do with our research is start to map against that what are the emission profiles for each of those systems. So you'll notice on the higher emitting, lower yielding systems, which tend to be pastoral based, the enteric fermentation is a larger component of the greenhouse gas emission than anything else. And then as you move across the screen towards the right-hand side in the higher input, higher output systems, you'll start to notice that manure becomes and nitrous oxide become a bigger part of the equation there. And that then lets us look at what are likely to be the most beneficial mitigation options for each of those systems. So that's a little bit about the latest research. But what are we doing to help emerging dairy regions such as in Africa? Well, as I mentioned before, we've been working to identify a number of countries for our early adopter program. And to do that, we've been working very closely with the Global Methane Pledge, with FAO, and with our own GDP staff. We've identified 10 countries that between them represent around 30% of the total emissions from the dairy sector. And through the US State Department and Global Methane Pledge, we've invited those countries to become part of the Pathways to Dairy Net Zero program. And here are the countries that we're talking to. And for Africa, it's Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda. And the governments of those 4 countries have all signed on to be part of the Pathways to Dairy Net Zero initiative. And right at the moment, we're at the stage where we're working very closely with the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, with FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, with our own Dairy Nourishes Africa program that's been running for some time now, to develop a set of proposals to the Green Climate Fund for the sort of funding that is necessary to conduct transformation in those marketplaces. And with that, I will yield the floor back, and thank you for your time listening to me today. Thank you.
Excellent. So really interesting, again, some kind of parallels to what Todd was talking about in terms of looking at the diversity and emphasizing food security, nutrition, and health above the, along with the mitigation as well. I'd like to actually, before we go into another kind of presentation, I'd like to ask Roba. I don't know if many people know, but pastoralist areas, particularly in East Africa, provide almost like 50% of the milk, from what I've understood, in Africa, which is amazing. I had never known that before. So, people think about sedentary mixed farming systems, but the pastoralists in Africa really provide a lot of the meat and the milk in Africa, and they're really a forgotten space. So, Roba, you're listening about this. You've heard what you've heard about net zero dairy. You've heard something from Todd. What do you see as the vision that you'd like to see as a pastoralist from Ethiopia? What's your vision for the future of pastoralism?
Thank you. So, as the previous discussions, pastoralism and pastoralists have not been, addressed well in having like low emissions. The modernized or the other industrialized countries are the one who are giving us, higher emissions, but we are the one facing those consequences. For example, from where I come from, the droughts and floods have been, in 10 years, but nowadays, in every years, we are experiencing those kinds of, challenges for the pastoralist community. So when we say let's not stop eating milk and drinking milk and eating meat, we have to see what does it have on it, or why are they having those mechanism to survive the nutrition. Like, for example, when you see the nutrition and health, and it also gives sustainable development for the countries like us. And it's also good for youth and women because of the nutrition they get from the milk and eating the meat also. So what's I see, in future is that it doesn't mean that there have to be no pastoralism or no livestock at all. It means that I have to see in the improvement in natural grassland and rangeland management. This can increase productivity and resilience, targeting the system and increasing their adaptation capacities. I have to see the, minimizing the gap of productivity, like improving the productivity and addressing the challenges of development and climate change crisis. And I also want to see more policies and institutionalizing pastoralism by doing research to know what is good and, from the science way, and what's good from the knowledge base of the indigenous peoples, and then try to, mix those two categories and have a better solution and policies to institutionalize pastoralism in order to create how much we can have low emissions. It's also improving animal and herding productivity and having sustainable animal production for the peoples. So when we address all those things, we can address the children's and women's, which are the most vulnerable in these kinds of situation. So minimizing the emission of greenhouse gas emission, a reduction from the livestock is the main point, and working in the livestock, like having a sustainable livestock in agri-food system in order to have a better landscape and biodiversity at all. So for us, there are some knowledge gaps, but we can fill those knowledge gaps of pastoralists in order coping up with the scientific ways and addressing those kinds of things. The main thing is we can create a curriculum or education-based system for pastoralism in order with climate change crisis, and what are the effects, what are the good ways, and how can we have a low emission related to these kinds of pastoralism systems. And the last thing is I want a transition with innovation, like, for example, access to technologies, that we need a transition of innovation ideas, and those ideas may make, opportunity for users and help them to in the, GDP of the development, and also as it is, fastest growing economic sector, many users can have opportunity to create their own life. So that is the transition I want to see. Thank you.
Excellent. I love that, transitions with innovations. And I think that, Ruri, this kind of fits in with what you were going to talk about. What you were going to talk about is a bit about cattle management in Africa. And what do you say, too, about this idea, transitions with innovations? Is this something that you guys have been thinking about?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this panel today. So GRSB is a global organization in 24 countries around the world. We are multi-stakeholder, so we have producers, we have processors, we have retailers, we have civil society, we have academia. We try to involve everybody who has an interest in making the sector more sustainable. And we started talking about efficiency and innovation long before we started talking about climate, to be honest. We knew that making the sector more sustainable, and in the early days there was a lot of focus on biodiversity and land conversion, but we knew that to be more sustainable, we needed to be more efficient and we needed to innovate. So absolutely on board with everything you just said. Since then, we've put out 3 goals. They're related to climate, they're related to nature-positive production, and they're related to animal health and welfare. And again, all of those 3 things reinforce each other in livestock systems. You really, when you're looking at these things, you have to recognize the multi-purpose nature of livestock, and the fact that all of the things that we do reinforce each other. So resilience is about adaptation. If we don't adapt to what's happening, we won't become resilient. And resilience, in my mind, and in many people's minds, it starts with the soil health. Livestock has a huge potential impact and potential to contribute to improved soil health. As I was saying, most livestock systems are still multi-purpose, and most livestock are involved in mixed livestock and crop systems. So I'll just talk about soil health for a second. We did a project several years ago now in Namibia with in communal grazing areas, so areas where a whole community has access to one area. What was happening at that time was that everybody was taking their livestock out sort of randomly, and the entire grazing area was grazed ineffectively every day by a very widespread herd. Working with herders there and people who could remember far enough back to how things used to be, the herd was consolidated. So the whole community herd was put back into one, and they were managed by herders to give fairly intensive grazing in one area and then prolonged rest. This had a really excellent impact in terms of the health of the rangelands, and subsequently on the health of the livestock and the output from the livestock in a fairly rapid sort of 3-year period. Since then, Herding for Health has taken that concept further, and they're implementing similar projects both in Southern Africa, in Botswana, in South Africa itself, but also in Kenya. And they're covering already more than 1 million hectares with these kind of projects. Why is it significant? Well, if we can increase the soil carbon by only 0.5, half of 1%, we can increase the moisture retention capacity of that soil by 150 tons per hectare. That is a phenomenal amount of water that really contributes to resilience of the system, whether it's a mixed crop livestock system or an agro-pastoral system. And it also improves infiltration of the water. So when the water goes in, we'll get better recharge of aquifers. I don't really want to talk about mitigation, because I think most of the things that we talk about in Africa, adaptation and the co-benefits of adaptation are really what matters. We need to get the livestock sector giving a return to the people who own it. In other words, productive, healthy livestock that can really contribute to livelihoods and nutrition of the family. just quickly go over what I think it needs to be. We need a holistic, when we talk about a just transition, it needs to be a holistic transition, and it needs to be an inclusive transition. So when I say holistic, I mean we need to think about the effects nationally. So for example, extension, husbandry, grazing management, all of these things, animal health services, access to technologies, including genetics, and make sure that markets are operating. But another consideration, certainly in pastoral areas, is land tenure. Land tenure can be a problem in many pastoral areas, and it's one that is often marginalized in favor of crop producers. So we see some of the most productive sort of grazing areas that are used in the most difficult grazing periods of the years then being taken over by crop producers. That we really need to sort out the land tenure in some of those regions. Regional approaches, we need to balance trade and export and domestic consumption, because, you know, fundamentally livestock should be contributing to the nutrition of the people in their own country before we start focusing on exports. Disease control and transboundary diseases are very important. But whenever we start making policies related to livestock, we really need foresight. We need to think about the impacts of those policies domestically, regionally, and even globally. And I would say that that is something that the developed countries at the moment are failing to do. So we're seeing several countries in Europe and the country I live in at the moment, New Zealand, saying they need to reduce their livestock herds. Well, okay, if you reduce your livestock herd, you're going to reduce your exports, because all of those countries are significant exporters. They export to North Africa and they export to other developing countries. Now, they may say, okay, fine, we're going to reduce, so that means that Africa can increase their herd. But just remember that a dairy cow, and I'm not suggesting that we should take directly this lesson, but a dairy cow in the Netherlands produces 30 liters of milk per day. In New Zealand, about 20 or 25. In Ethiopia, a dairy cow, or a cow, because it's a multi-purpose animal, produces about 1 liter of milk a day. So if you remove cows from the dairy herd in Netherlands, saying you're going to reduce emissions, you are actually going to increase emissions globally, because they will be replaced by cows that emit more per liter. So that's what I mean by foresight. We absolutely need to balance what we're doing in developed countries with what the needs of developing countries are. So just a final plea on this, we need to invest. When we talk about livestock systems and a just transition, if it's going to be just, we need to invest in it. 2/3 of the land used to produce food in the world is not suitable for growing human edible crops. At the moment, we spend 5% of official development assistance on agriculture as a whole. Only 1/25 of that, in other words, 0.2%, is spent on livestock development. That is absolutely not enough for an activity that covers 2/3 of the land we use to produce food, and probably nearly 30% of the Earth's terrestrial surface. So inclusive development is essential. We need to involve the pastoralists, we need to involve the youth, we need to involve women in this development process.
Thanks a lot. I think we, really an impassioned plea here, and again, very similar to what we're hearing. I think you threw in this idea of holistic kind of thinking. Also, what we've been calling at ILRI, this approach that's really taking off One Health, looking at all the different elements between animal, human, and ecosystem health and how they interact, particularly with the soil carbon. I wanted to get back to that with Elizabeth, to really think about you're a farmer yourself, doing a lot of vegetables. You're a community leader, a women's leader. And you have a mixed farming system, so you're not just growing cattle, or you're not just growing livestock, but you're doing a little bit of livestock from what I understood, and also a lot of vegetables. Can you tell us how livestock looks on your farm and how it interacts with other things, and what do you see as the future?
All right. Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. As rightly said, I'm into vegetable production, but as the climate change issues approached, I went to look for a land somewhere and started livestock production, such as goat, sheep, cow, And then that's what I'm doing now with a few poultry products as well. Now, what is happening in Ghana? Policies actually do not favor livestock farmers down south. But in the north, because they have the lands, they have vast lands, they have vast lands and they have grasses to feed them, they are allowed over there. But when you come to down south, the lands are not there. Most of the lands are used for estate houses. People are building everywhere. So it's not actually allowed to rear livestock. The maximum you can rear is about 10. If you have goats, you need 10. Sheep, 10. Cow, depending on the size of the land, 10. And in Ghana, when you come to the down south, I think it's not the best because it's the same livestock that with their feces we use for manure for our crops. That is when we go organic. And without that, it's not enough. It's not enough because the livestock is also not enough in down south. And when you are coming from the north, it's very far. If you have to buy cow dung to the south, you're going to spend a lot. Therefore, we use inorganic fertilizer instead of using the organic. So these are some of the issues. So with the down south, it's not really helping. It is my wish that the government will come out with new policies to help farmers so that at least if you have 3 acres of land for crop production and vegetable production, you can also have at least 1 acre for livestock production so that you can use the feces, process it into organic manure, and then put under your crops in order to get organic food. So that is my view about this. And in the near future, and also with meat, we also need it for meat, and we need it for milk. Few farmers are also producing milk with the cows in Ghana, but it's not enough. I can say just 1% of the fresh milk. That is what we are getting. And most Ghanaians prefer fresh milk to the other canned milk, but we are not getting it the way we want. So it is my plea that there will be policies governing that farmers and then other people like the youth coming up will be educated to produce livestock and then to feed the nation as well. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask so far as we go through? So let's go, we'll kind of go around the horn here because I have to walk. Here you go, let's start here.
Thank you very much. I'm David Pala. I work for the Kenyan government, and I have a small question. There has been a lot of talk about livestock emissions, and if we look at the livestock production system as a whole, there are ways in which livestock systems cause carbon sequestration. There are ways in which livestock contribute to sustainability. Now, how can we escalate this debate so that when we talk about livestock production systems, we talk about the carbon balance, not emissions only? Because I've interacted with studies conducted in Australia and in Argentina in which livestock systems were found to be net sequesters of carbon, net sinks, yeah? And when he was talking about grazing management, that is one of the things that will lead to the system being a net sink. How can we escalate the debate so that we talk of the balance, not the emissions only?
Okay, we'll come back to people. So how to talk about the balance? You have a question?
My name is John Lewis, and almost half a century ago, I worked for an international center called ILCA as a postdoc, now called ILRI. Subsequently, I became director of agriculture at USAID, had the Ethiopian ambassador in tears in my office because they had moved to Nairobi. And this was considered disloyal of me. It was out of my hands by the time. Anyway, my question is, since retirement from USAID, I've been working on land-based credits. And once upon a time, they were $5 a ton. Now they're $20 a ton. And so when I hear adaptation, resilience, as a social scientist, in my day, the centers hired social scientists. I kept funding ILRI even though they didn't hire as many social scientists as they did in my day. But as a social scientist, I see these as code words for donor control of the agenda. Adaptation is great, resilience is great, but mitigation is money. And it's money if you do it right. And of course, if you don't do it right, your credit's not worth as much because it doesn't sell as well on the secondary risk markets. But it's credit. We heard, what are we talking, 2/3, 3/4 of the nature-based solution is pastoral land, perennial crops. Mongolia is matching hundreds of millions of dollars with the Asian Development Bank, and they only get 300 millimeters of rain, and it's sand to do perennial grass offset credits. So, you know, we heard the Remote Sensing Center could be a registry under Article 6.4. I see the Japanese funding Kenya to do a registry under Article 6.4. Meanwhile, the Remote Sensing Center is in Kenya, and there's enormous capital investment in what you need for mitigation credits, which is remote sensing, but you need the participation of these local groups. And so I'm saying, why are we all so allergic to mitigation credits? If you took these same numbers and added it up, converting from annual to perennial grasses, it's a lot of money there. Why shouldn't African farmers get that money? Because, oh my God, donors will have to do something they don't know how to do, which is talk to big, bad, rich, polluting oil and mining companies and their Wall Street handlers. I have two other remarks, but I'll stop here on that.
Thanks a lot. We have one more quick question, yeah? And just to let you know, we are still in Ethiopia, and so there is two. Yeah. Okay. Okay, great.
Thank you, yeah. So my name is Amin Khan. I'm with the Kenya Climate Change Working Group. It's an umbrella civil society organization. And I've been working in Kenya, in Nairobi, and going to many universities and meeting youth groups and women. And I have come to a conclusion to a certain extent when you talked about milk production, that there is a need for climate-smart agriculture in context with livestock. We need to bring about hydroponics because we have a lot of seed for barley, and we all know that you need to have basically the barley for fodder. We need to have the roughage and the enzymes. So I am proposing that as much as possible, if, like my friend here says, that if we can get commitment for funds and move towards this climate-smart agriculture, particularly for hydroponics, I think that will be a very good solution, not only to be able to provide cows and also goats and others with increased milk production, but also to reduce the pastoralism as much as possible and bring about more zero grazing. And of course, the value add which comes with it. I don't know if you agree with me. Question.
Great. Let's take these three, and then we'll get one more. Anyone want to take the carbon balance, this whole issue of carbon credits, and then the trade-offs with, you know, hydroponics for feed, I guess?
Yeah, thanks for the one on mitigation and why does it sound like we're allergic? I guess what we're saying is adaptation is key, because if we don't adapt, we won't produce. Mitigation, and certainly payments for mitigation, is, to my mind, a great co-benefit, and we're definitely not allergic to seeing people being paid for those co-benefits. A sort of slightly different view from the one you put forward, I heard last night in the Coronivia discussions from India, where they said, when we talk about mitigation from smallholder producers in developing countries, we're basically saying that wealthy countries are not capable of mitigating their emissions, and they wish to place that burden on the shoulders of small producers in developing countries. I don't necessarily agree with that either. I'm just putting it forward as an opposing viewpoint. I do believe that payments for environmental services will be key to supporting smallholder farmers, but I don't think they're the reason for being. I think we need to adapt, or we won't be producing food at all.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very interesting observation, if I may put it like that. One of the things I want to say is that just as you said, the opportunities in terms of benefits that some of the pastoral areas can get from what is available. The biggest challenge right now is the lack of awareness and the lack of capacity to be able to implement some of these projects. I know, for example, in Kenya we have a carbon project which has immensely benefited farmers in the pastoral areas. So what we actually need is to have more of this, because what it does is actually to improve the grazing management and the carbon, soil carbon, which is very important for us. So as you increase the soil carbon, then you're talking about enhancing adaptation and resilience in these communities. So the lack of awareness is a big challenge. And in terms of taking advantage of the articles within the Paris Agreement, especially Article 6, which is there, and most of the African and the global South are not able to take it up. Yeah, but we are seeing now there's a trend. Kenya is one of the lucky countries, in addition to South Africa. I guess Nigeria is also doing, and a few countries in the north of Africa that are actually benefiting in terms of that. I wanted to respond to the issue of hydroponics. For you to go into hydroponics for cattle, you use 4 kilos of wheat or barley to produce only 1 kilogram of dry matter. So it's actually more costly, yeah, to use hydroponics for cattle and ruminants, because you'll invest more in the crops, yeah. Yes, you're getting a better quality kind of feed because it is younger, but if you look at the cost element and even the issue of emissions, it actually becomes even more, because you're using 4 kilograms of dry matter to only get 1 kilogram of dry matter that is going to the animal, which may not be the case. You may not agree with me, but we can look at those figures. Those are some of the things that we can look at. But for other enterprises like the non-ruminant sector, it is a very possible way of actually improving the feed and ensuring that we are reducing emissions, but not for ruminants. Yeah, not for ruminants.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to gentleman in the back. I'm sorry, I missed your name in the introduction. As an anthropologist who's a principal scientist at ILRI, I can assure you we still hire social scientists. I will opine that we do not hire enough of us, but we're working on that. So we do have a lot of expertise in speaking with farmers and understanding community concerns and perspectives and priorities and the intersecting drivers and pressures. What we don't have is expertise in the business models for how to connect with carbon markets in a global sense. However, since I have been at the COP for the last 9 days, I have spoken with 2 private sector companies. One's coming out of India, who has a business model for connecting smallholder dairy producers with carbon markets. I can assure you he's going to be toward the top of my list of people to respond to once I get back to my normal life. And the other guy I spoke with is another startup who's centering on connecting rangelands with carbon markets. And I would emphasize, reiterating my colleagues, that he really understood the importance of starting with functioning land tenure and legitimate, credible management institution for a rangeland unit, because without that, you can't do anything. So those dynamics are in the works. We're getting there.
You had one more question, yeah?
Thank you. My name is Frederick Allo. and I work with the State Department of Livestock in Kenya. And I've been working in the rangelands for the last 30 years, and I'm still working those regions. The only thing that I wanted to, mine is not a question, it's more of a remark. Based on the dry lands, especially much of Kenya, as you know, is almost asal areas, that is the northern part. And these are actually, I would categorize them as smallholder pastoralists because they are basically at a small scale, they are not large-scale pastoral farmers. So they own animals in small numbers, but if you look at it from the larger part, then there's a bigger number. But then when I look at it from the point of emissions, I stand to disagree because I was also in that meeting of Coronavia with India, and I really pitied them because they were like talking about the smallholder farmers. We are today blaming our pastoralists that we are saying that livestock emissions are high in those regions. But if you look at the population of those animals, then you come back to the dairy areas and then you look at the population of this number of dairy animals. Actually, the dairy animal is a higher emitter because that's what you are talking about, the 30 kilograms vis-a-vis the 1 kilogram emitter. But another thing is that the utilization of these resources in that those animals in those asal areas can basically utilize those resources in a better way because those are the basic available resources at that in that place at that time. But then we're coming from the anthropological point of view, you look at the social aspect of pastoralists, actually you look at emissions are like the waste from the animals, especially like manure and the rest, they are basically being recycled in a very good way because of the carbon sequestration in the soils. Vis-a-vis in high potential areas where we are talking about synthetic fertilizers, a lot of nitrogen, emission from nitrogen is quite high compared to carbon. So basically, my approach is that if we can find a way on how to, then utilization of these resources is that if you look at the animals, we have cattle, sheep, and goats. Today, much of the cattle are being disseminated because of the availability of grass, and they cannot manage, they cannot sustain themselves in that environment. Then a lot of sheep, goats are coming up, and then the woody plant species are coming up, so that we have sheep and camels. And that's where we talk about milk. Milk is available. And then the next thing that the key area that we have to do research on very much is to do with these camels now, how they can utilize them in those dry areas, because milk is available throughout the year, and the milk is an important nutrient, as you are aware. Thank you.
Anybody else have, okay.
Thank you, moderator, for giving me the chance, and thank you, panelists. My name is Abebe from IGAD. Yeah, there's great presentations and discussions. My question is, I have seen the graph. When you increase productivity of the milk production, your emission decreases. Is that the understanding? If I'm not mistaken. So now, I would say that mitigation also is important, though adaptation is a priority. And the countries, be it Kenya, Ethiopia, they have national targets. They have set national targets to reduce their emissions. Though I don't know how they will meet. Is it through the livestock sector? Is it through the industry? Is it through forestry, whatever? But for me, from the graph I saw, how can we increase the productivity of livestock production, for that matter, milk production in the global south, and at the same time decrease emission and benefit economically? What should be the technology transfer mechanism for that?
Anyone, yeah? Uri, I think, wants to take that one. And then if anyone else has any final comments, too, before we wrap it up.
Thanks. So there's one caveat to that graph, and that is that it doesn't account for the multi-purpose nature of livestock in developing countries. So you could also be attributing some of those emissions, which in the graph were attributed to milk, to manure production, and to the fact that this is a tradable resource, and to the fact that you might get meat from the offspring. So that is the caveat. But through genetics, we could already improve performance by 30%. Through better feeding, we could already improve performance. Sorry. FAO has also produced a document about animal health and its impact on livestock emissions. All of those things are part of the solution to mitigating, but also to adaptation.
I
think what we'll do is just give everybody one kind of final statement. What's the next step? What's the action that we need to take just to think about? And then we'll end up with Bernard, who will give us a summary, okay? Elizabeth, any final comments, thoughts, actions for?
With all that we are saying, without education, building capacity of farmers, it wouldn't come to existence. Though all that I want to say is there should be enough education and capacity building of farmers. Thank you.
So many things to say. I think I would just reiterate that investing in the growth of the livestock sectors across Africa is consistent with decreasing greenhouse gas emissions from the livestock sector and in industrial food systems. And that we need to hold this nuance in mind if we're to support successful adaptation in Africa.
Okay, for me, in order to have, carbon emission, for example, having natural rangeland restoration, we can get, soil carbons from that, so we can have much more carbon, a decrease in emission by getting soil carbon from the rangeland restoration. So if we are talking about climate justice and climate effect or crisis, then let's not try to forget the pastoralists and the livestock that are existing in the world with more millions and millions people's, day-to-day life. So when we say justice, it represents everyone. So no one should be left behind. So we should be in it in every discussion and in every stage. That's what I want.
Absolutely second that. And I would just say with healthy soil, we'll get healthy plants, healthy animals. We can have lower emission livestock sector that provides a better life for hundreds of millions of people. So let's invest in it rather than denigrating it.
Yeah, I just want to say one or two things before I say the closing remarks. One is when you look at Africa, we are looking at a continent that has the lowest consumption in terms of animal source foods. All right? It has the lowest. If you look at all the regions across the world, it has the lowest. Yeah? But in addition to that, then we're also looking at a region which has the lowest emissions, yeah, from the livestock sector. In terms of water use efficiency, livestock is the most efficient. It's even better than most of the crops that we grow because we use green water, not even blue water. We don't do a lot of irrigation for feed production in Africa. So I mean, if you look across all the regions in the world, livestock is said to have the highest efficiency in terms of water use, especially the blue water, because we hardly use any. We use the green water, okay? So what we are saying, in essence, is that then we have to escalate the debate around the issues around sustainability and issues of just transition based on that framing, all right? So when you look at it, then we have to consider in these regions where we have the lowest emission levels, where we have the lowest consumption of critical nutrients that are required. I think it has already been mentioned, the 1,000 days, the critical nutrients, we still have an issue. So for me, what I'm hearing from the discussion today is that we must look at just transition from 3 or 4 aspects. One is the multifunctionality of the livestock, all right? Livestock is important when you're talking about the social aspects, economic and livelihoods, but you're also talking about livestock being important in terms of the environment. Yeah, they contribute positively to the environment, but we can do better by looking at how can we make it better. If it is in terms of enhancing the grazing systems, whether you are using better breeds, yeah, all these are things that we must look at. And we say this multifunctionality, then will be taken care of. The second aspect is that we must look at issues around livestock from a context specific. We should not use the issues that are arising in the global north and apply them in the global south. We have to look at region by region. Yeah, in the global north, probably the efficiency levels have already been attained. That's why we are talking about improving feed, going to feed additives. We have not reached that level in the global south, all right? So for the global south, let's look at how can we improve the efficiency of these animals, yeah? The graph that Donald Moore showed us is that if we improve our milk production, for example, in Kenya, the lactation volumes of milk that we get is about 2,500. If we increase this to 5,000 liters, we'll be at the level of the global producers of milk. So the opportunities for us to be able to move up, and this has already been talked about. So let's look at issues around livestock based on the different contexts. Let's not generalize. That is what is also coming out. We have opportunities, yeah, of investment. We hear the issue of carbon market. We hear the investment, the opportunity around innovations. We can invest in innovations that can actually bring out technologies and innovations that are going to support our farmers. Yeah. So how can we mobilize adequate resources to be able to take advantage of that, so that we have innovations, we are delivering the technologies and innovations that are there to the end users. Yeah, and how can you make them aware about the issues around emissions, resilience, and adaptation? Because this understanding is not there. And then finally, we must look around livestock being sustainable in the long run. And it has to be across the globe. Yeah, we understand there are challenges in some of the regions, but we have issues around mitigation in our NDCs. We must be candid and say that. So we have to transition. Yeah, so we cannot say that we cannot transition, but let us look at all this in totality so that we are moving together as a family. Otherwise, this has been very useful discussion for all of us.
Thanks a lot, Bernard. And I think for me, like one of the two things that come out is like what you talked about. Let's not export the problems of the West to the global South and all these unintended consequences that Rory was talking about that will happen because of the multifunctionality of livestock. Reminds me of Taylor Swift's "The Problem Is Me" new song. And let's not export those problems to the global South as well. But with that, I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank this excellent panel. Again, we had a really great diversity of perspectives, and I think we see that livestock means a lot more in Africa than just something that's in the saran wrap. We'll get your question later. And that's something that's in the market, but it means a lot to people, and we have to think about that. We're continuing this discussion. We have on Twitter, Let's Talk Livestock hashtag, where you can continue this discussion, and you can get a lot of resources on sustainable livestock from whylivestockmatters.org. So please join us there. Thank you very much, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Hello. Hello?
Hello? Yeah?
It's over.
Andrew! I'm so sorry. I think you may be the very last. Andrew Moffat, I believe you might be a bit late to some of our events at the African Pavilion. And I would also like to everyone know that there's been a super spreader event at the US that the Americans didn't tell us about. Africa! That's exactly what you want to see. It's the last day, yeah? You cannot have... No?
Can you take one of this camera? So one last one for the...
No, 2 weeks ago we should have taken the picture. Oh, look at you, Helen. Yeah!
High impact people. This one. High impact people. Ready to Steve anymore?
Oh, another picture. Now I go to the toilet.